When Congress agrees this fast, you know either something's wrong or something's really wrong. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, the podcast where we take legislation seriously without taking ourselves too seriously. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Stephen, and today's bill is one of those rare congressional unicorns, bipartisan, fast-moving, and passed with the kinds of margins that make you check if Congress accidentally found teamwork in the dictionary and thought, yeah, I'll have a bit of that.
Seriously, though, when something clears the Senate by unanimous consent and then sails through the House 409 to 2, you really start asking, what just happened?
Yes, exactly. You don't see it very often, do you? I mean, we've looked at so many bills. Even if they pass, they tend to pass by the narrowest of margins. But this one, yep, everybody loved it. So today we're talking about S146, better known as the Take It Down Act, which became law in May 2025. And if you were thinking, wait, Congress passed a major tech-related law quickly? Well, we're thinking that too.
And because this is Beyond the Bill Number, we're not just saying what passed. We're breaking it down of what it actually does, why it got the level of support it did, and why some very serious civil liberties groups are not thrilled. Okay, Stephen, let's start with the basics, because this gets mischaracterized a lot. Is this a broad deepfakes law?
No, it isn't. And that distinction matters a lot, really. The Takedown Act is not a general, broad deepfakes law that's looking at everything. It's a targeted statute aimed specifically at non-consensual intimate imagery, which includes AI-generated digital forgeries that are realistic enough to function like real photos or videos.
Okay, so not memes, not satire, not political ads.
Right. This is very specific about deepfake porn, revenge porn, coercive threats involving intimate images, especially where the harm is immediate and severe.
Okay, and that narrow framing is a big reason why this bill was politically viable. Why did this issue break through when so many tech bills have stalled?
Well, it's really hit a rare legislative sweet spot. So you've got clear victims, you've got clear harm, you've got cheap, widely available tools that are making the problem worse, and a fix that sounds pretty intuitive. Just stop it spreading as fast as you can. Non-consensual intimate imagery, especially the AI generated stuff, has exploded in recent sort of months and over the past year or so. You've got all of these nudification apps, deepfake generators, frictionless sharing, and all of this means that victims can be targeted at scale, often with no realistic way to claw content back once it's out there. As we all know, when something gets out into the internet, really hard to actually stop it spreading.
Yeah, and the minors are especially vulnerable here. School settings, peer harassment, repeat reposting, it's quite a nightmare.
Yes, it really is. I'm quite glad that I'm not in school right now. I think that most of us are. It just seems there's so many other dangers out there. And this stuff, I mean, you can just imagine how you'd feel if someone made up one of these fake photos of you and then spread it around the school. I mean, absolute nightmare. So add advocacy pressure, all of the major media coverage that we've seen about this, and also high profile political backing, including from the First Lady. And suddenly not acting becomes actually the risky political choice.
All right, that tends to make sense when we're talking about children and porn. Let's get into the actual mechanics here. What does the Take It Down Act do?
It does two major things. So think of it as like a 1-2 punch. So first, it creates a federal criminal prohibition on knowingly publishing or threatening to publish, which is an interesting little caveat, non-consensual intimate imagery, including certain AI-generated digital forgeries. Secondly, it creates a 48-hour notice and removal requirement for covered platforms, which is enforced by the Federal Trade Commission.
Okay, so there's deterrence plus damage control.
Exactly. So criminal law to punish the worst actors and fast takedowns to reduce this ongoing harm and hopefully reduce the spread.
And definitions are doing a lot of work here. Let's talk about digital forgery.
Yes, so the Act defines digital forgery as an intimate depiction created or altered using software or AI that would appear indistinguishable from a real image to a reasonable person. That's crucial, really. The law isn't aimed at obviously fake or stylized content. It's about realism, content that functions like a real photo and is specifically designed to fool people into thinking that it is real.
Okay, that is a very good definition in my opinion.
They seem pretty solid.
Okay, and so then consent is defined pretty strictly in this legislation too.
Yes, absolutely. So if somebody is okay with these images being spread, then obviously you don't want to take criminal action against anybody. So affirmative voluntary consent, free from coercion or fraud, is the definition that's used. So implied consent, no, not enough. Well, they didn't say no loudly enough. No, no, that's not enough either. It needs to be very clear consent.
An opt in, not the lack of an opt out.
Absolutely.
All right, so walk us through how the criminal side works here because it's different for adults than it is for minors.
Yes, yes, that's right. Which again makes a lot of sense, really, because obviously kids and adults have very different priorities and very different ways of actually providing the kind of consent that we were talking about. So for adults, several elements have to line up. So first of all, the subject had a reasonable expectation of privacy. They didn't voluntarily expose the content publicly. Obviously, you don't want to be sort of if they've already put it out there, you don't want to be prosecuting people who are merely sort of disseminating it. The depiction isn't a matter of public concern, which is a really important one, of course, because you don't want public figures, you don't want politicians hiding behind the law. And the publication causes or is intended to cause harm. And that's an interesting one as well, because the proving that something actually genuinely causes harm is quite tough. But if it's intended to cause harm, obviously that's a slightly easier bar to get over. So for minors, though, it's much, much stricter. The statute focuses on intent. So is the intent to abuse, humiliate, harass, degrade, or sexually arouse? If so, then it falls foul of this law.
Wow, okay. Those are definitely two very distinct paths.
Really, they really are.
So, what are the penalties here?
Okay, well, they're pretty stiff too. For up to 2 years in prison for adult-related offences and 3 years for minors. Threats to publish, so as often you find these images can be used for extortion or coercion, are separately criminalised as well. Then you've also got mandatory restitution and forfeiture provisions in there as well. So they're not symbolic penalties by any means. You could do serious jail time.
All right, this is pretty interesting. And it is different than having to register as a sex offender or something like that for creating kiddie porn, which we can see
Yeah,
now in the real world. So it's interesting how
absolutely.
they have this kind of separate definition where you're not necessarily subjecting children to creating porn, but you are.
Mhm.
Okay. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how this tech is getting treated.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about the part that's getting the most attention, this 48-hour takedown provision.
Yes, yes. This is where it's actually quite different from other laws that you might see in other countries in particular. So, and it's really where this real world impact lives. It's okay to punish people, but how do you actually stop it having the impact? So,
Mhm.
platforms will have to create formal processes for victims or their representatives to submit takedown requests. And once a valid request is received, the platform must remove the content as soon as possible and certainly no later than 48 hours and make reasonable efforts to prevent identical re-uploads. Failure to
Okay.
comply with this is treated as an unfair or deceptive practice under FTC authority.
Okay, so this moves us straight into the compliance departments.
Yes, exactly. There's a liability shield for platforms that remove content in good faith, even if it turns out that the content wasn't unlawful. And that incentive structure actually really matters here.
Okay, so this law is narrow by design, but that creates gaps.
Yes, yes, and they're quite deliberate. The obviously drafters of this law wanted the law to pass. They didn't want to get distracted, and they certainly didn't want to sort of wade into much murkier territory where, like, First Amendment rights sort of
Mhm.
become much more problematic. So it deliberately doesn't cover election deepfakes, fraud deepfakes, defamation, or impersonation outside intimate imagery. It also excludes certain services like telecom providers, email, direct messaging, and access only ISPs, which means some harmful content channels do actually fall outside of this takedown regime.
Okay, only two no votes in the House. Why is that?
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? So when everybody else was super enthusiastic for this particular bill, you had two people who were like, "No, no, it goes too far for me." So those two people were Representatives Thomas Massey and Eric Burleson. Their objections split into two different camps. So the first one is fear of abuse and over removal. They see this as a slippery slope towards
Hmm.
censorship. Which you can understand. Certainly, a bill that's as sort of it's tightly written, but there's always going to be loopholes. There's always ways to exploit this, possibly to censor other content. And then the other one, a very familiar argument that you might expect from people, particularly on the right, you've got federalism and First Amendment concerns. So are we violating people's First Amendment rights by removing their content and forbidding them from putting it up there? So they argued that the content that's covered by this is already criminalized at the state level. And so they warned about expanding federal power and speech suppression. So very, very familiar arguments there. Normally, the kind of arguments that would lead to laws like this failing, but clearly they didn't manage to convince any of their colleagues.
Yeah, it's interesting also because obviously Twitter had that, or X had that crazy porn generating bot. And even if it's
Exactly.
not legal on the state level, that has been running rampant since this bill passed in May last year. And
Yes,
as far as I understand, it wasn't getting enforced that this porn shouldn't be out there on the internet that people
exactly.
aren't consenting to. And when you're talking about generating porn about
Yeah.
little children, it's like, I come
It,
on.
it is, but even about adults as well. I think the
Yeah.
Grok example is a really good one because there were hundreds of thousands of those images being
Yeah.
generated, just churning them out. So how would this law work? I mean, imagine the sheer volume of complaints and takedown and so on. And why didn't it work? Why weren't those images taken down? I think it'd be interesting to see whether this law was applicable under those circumstances or not, because it certainly didn't seem to act as a deterrent putting those things out there. And as we know, Elon Musk at first was saying, ah, it's fine. What's wrong with
Mm-hmm.
putting women in bikinis? You know, there's pictures of women in bikinis all over the internet. But then when obviously the backlash became too great, he did actually roll back from that and say, okay, we are going to get rid of the image. Or didn't he at least say only paid users of Grok will be able to actually do this, which is a classic sort of Elon Musk step. But yeah, so interesting example of perhaps where this law wasn't working so well.
Yes. And supporters say that this is victim protection with teeth, which hopefully we could see.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So you've got speed plus enforcement. So critics, including the civil liberties groups that we mentioned, do warn that a fast takedown system incentivizes the sort of remove first, verify later approach, especially for smaller platforms. So they're going to err on the side of caution and just rip down anything that they feel might sort of violate this law in any way. So you've got groups like the EFF, CDT, even the CCRI, which is an organization focused on combating image-based sexual abuse. They supported the criminal ban, but raised serious concerns about this takedown system and the potential for abuse there.
Okay. And other countries are tackling this too, but in a different way.
Yeah, that's right. So the US approach is distinctive in pairing criminal law with a federally enforced takedown clock. Other countries emphasize like regulator removal, broader platform safety regimes, or standalone criminal offences. It's a bit like the Online Harms Act in the UK. I mean, it's really talking about fining platforms that actually allow this stuff to go on, but they don't have that. You must take it down straight away. But a lot of people are talking about that now and saying that our laws, even though they only passed a few years ago, are already woefully out of date. We basically need to have another go at it and update them all.
It's crazy how fast these kinds of things can
Mhm.
change. And I was thinking back to when I was in college, there was this app, it was called Yik Yak. And it was an anonymized, almost like a Twitter, where you could just
Mm.
post threads. And
Right.
it was so terrible to see the stuff that people were posting about other people. I just remember how detrimental that was to so many people. I knew a lot of people that had had stuff posted about them that was
Yeah.
just so terrible. And just thinking of these eras of kids' lives where this type of behavior is common, and it used to just
Yeah.
be the bully shoving you into the locker or maybe a trash
Yeah.
can. And now we have all of these different technological things that are changing so quickly. And how do you, one, protect kids, and two, kind of disincentivize the behavior in general? And then also thinking of the adults in the mix, you don't stop getting your feelings hurt by stuff like this just because you're not a
Yes.
child anymore. This is just something I think is nightmare fuel thinking back to my own high school experience.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so kids are really struggling with this. There have been suicides and things. So this is a good step, I think. This law is a good step, but you need to constantly keep updating the laws, and particularly in the US, you've got these sort of First Amendment concerns as well.
Mhm.
How does this marry with free speech? People are allowed to say what they like, right? So this is very specific and very narrow, saying don't make porn that looks like people, and if you do, then you're committing a criminal offense. But the wider offense, I think, of just maligning people online and telling lies about them online, and how exactly do you control that, particularly for children? Yeah, it's a big issue.
We're definitely to a point of freedom of speech exists, but it's not freedom from consequences. And
Yes. Yeah.
where do you draw the lines? We've talked about this in the past with the UK's online harassment law and some other things like
Mm.
that. But yeah,
Yep.
we're in an interesting phase of existence where
Yeah.
it's never
Yeah.
been easier to be worse to people, and
Yes,
that's not
without
right.
consequences. Yeah, it is. This idea of being consequence free, I think hopefully people are getting a little bit more mature now. The internet's been
Mhm.
around a while. I think people are realizing that if you post something nasty online, it does have consequences on those
Mhm.
people. But it's not the same as saying it's their face, is it? Most people just wouldn't. There's
Right.
this massive social contract that you don't say terrible things to people's face or do this because, just the social embarrassment and the impact on yourself. Whereas online, you can do that. I mean, I think our laws were sort of trying to replicate that in a way by saying, well, if you do this online, then, maybe the police will knock on the door and have a word with you. But
Mhm.
it's, as a lot of people are very concerned about that it's gone too far. And obviously, it's wasting police time. You really want your police spending your time sort of, looking on Twitter and seeing what nasty things people have put up there. So, yeah, it's a really tough one. This is just one step in the right direction, I think.
If you think about what this specific law is trying to address and what you would have done to kind of make this offense before this technology existed, you would essentially be a peeping Tom taking pictures of somebody without them
Yeah,
knowing and then disseminating
absolutely.
those. And so, just because you didn't actually do that action,
Yeah.
you would never do that. So, why would you do that with
Yes.
technology? And
Yeah.
yeah, we live in weird times. But I mean, the big question here for me is does this stop these deep fakes?
Well, I mean, as we saw with the Grok example, it clearly doesn't, does it? Because this stuff carries on, but it should reduce the harm. It doesn't solve the problem, but by adding in some consequences, maybe at the very least, it will make people think twice. Because what we really need, of course, is for people to be convicted under this and sent to prison. And that starts then to send out some messages, doesn't it? But if it works properly, then it will help victims get content taken down faster. It should create some clearer federal prosecution paths. How difficult it is to convict people on this stuff. So this law just creates a new path that should make it a little bit easier. And it should change platform incentives as well. So can we actually change the behavior
Mhm.
of these platforms and actually make them start policing themselves a little bit better? But it does leave some big issues unresolved, like the over removal issue, encryption pressures, and deepfakes, obviously, that are outside intimate imagery, it's political deepfakes and things like that.
Whole can of worms that's getting worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is exactly why tracking implementation matters, not just passage.
Yes, which is, of course, where Bill Track 50 shines. You can follow not just the bill, but the enforcement rules, amendments, and the next wave of AI legislation that's absolutely coming.
Oh, yes, it is indeed. And if you want a balanced pro con summary of this bill, check out Issue Voter Analysis that's linked directly from the bill's page.
Yes, because the bill number, as we all know, is just the beginning.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, and let us know which bill you want us to break down next.
Until then, stay informed and always look for extra fingers in those videos you see online.